Okay, so your other part of the inorganic division of this course, that is 521, is about to start now, and you are already familiar about the time frame, rules, regulations, whatever we normally follow. So, and for this particular component of the course, it is nothing unusual. The same thing would be following. And I think Professor Murugavel has already conveyed to you that we'll have the combined exam of his part and my part. Unfortunately, this time I would be getting lesser hours in terms of the lecturing. But today morning, one student, he pointed me out that the last class, which is on 5th, right? So I think 5th is the Diwali. Okay. So if I look at the time frame and etc., I should get at least 6 classes, including 5th. That means 9 hours. So I would be grateful if you kindly agree to be there on 5th itself, because it's online. So just 1.5 hours matter. Wherever you may be, but Diwali be in the class. Okay. So I hope you won't be disagreeing with me. So this is how I plan it. But if you say, nah, stop, there won't be any class on the day of Diwali, then I have no option other than to stop it. So this is how it is. Now this course, essentially the 9 hours, you would be concentrating on the fact of particularly one particular spectroscopic technique, which is very useful from inorganic and organic point of views. Now, this is called ESR spectroscopy or EPR spectroscopy. Okay. Now, you see that, let me first talk about, don't worry, I will provide you that PPT after each class, as well as the videos also. But that does not necessarily mean that you can sit without being in the class. But I prefer you to participate in the classes so that you can have better interactions or better understanding, and then you can go through the PPT or video the way you wish to. But please be in the class as much as you can manage to come. There won't be any record of your being in the class or not, so it's up to you. But I wish you to be in the class, okay, so that we can have a better perception about the topic what we are planning to cover. Now, let me tell you regarding the books. Okay, I don't know whether you have the right habit of reading the books or not. I personally prefer to go through the books. The reason is, once you go through the book, you will have much better, I should say, perception, scientific perception or perception of any topic. In this case, one spectroscopic topic we are talking about. So at least whenever you have some extra time in hand, then on top of the PPT or videos, what you will be getting it, please go through at least, for some time, these 2 books. One is called the physical methods in inorganic chemistry, that is Drago. And another book is the very common inorganic book, Hui. All of you must have heard the name of these 2 books, and both are accessible, available in our library. So you can go and see it as and when you have time. Now the Drago, if you see it, there are 2 chapters. So on EPR, so you can follow the first chapter, which deals mostly with the Hamiltonian and all sort of physics. So you may be interested in going through and understanding all those things. And the other chapter, if I am right, that in one particular edition, that page number starts 547 or something like that. that deals with the real molecules, but in a little bit complicated fashion. But if you go through my lectures, notes and videos, probably parallelly, if you go through those two books, that will be very helpful. On the other hand, Hui book, which is a very, it's a friendly in nature. Friendly in nature means it won't talk much about the basics, but it will deal with your example straight away. On top of that, in today's scenario, you can type in Google and you will be getting most of the informations, including the videos available over there. But the problem is they deal mostly with the very basic concept of this EPR technique, but they don't consider the complicated items, particularly from the point of view of electronic structures, where I would like to put some more emphasis at the later part. So in that context, probably this course would be very, very effective. Now, if you see the whole class, I'm assuming that the class would be on 5th of November, then 9 hours, that means 6 days. So we'll try to cover the following 8 topics. Okay, out of that, up to topic number 1 to say 8 or 6, these are the general concept around that ESR technique. There are a lot of issues to be understood properly if you want to make it really effective as far as your understanding is concerned. Now, last 2 part, that is topic number 7 and 8, this deals with your electronic structural aspects. And there you deal with a lot of recent examples, and you will see that how complicated it could be and how we could manage to handle the situations, not with much difficulties. Because if your background is good enough, then you can handle many complicated issues around the molecules. Okay, because as a chemist, at the end of the day, we deal with the molecules. And our basic concept to understand the molecular behavior. Okay, and here the molecular behavior is around the unpaired spin in the molecule. Okay, so this is how we plan to move on. Now, any spectroscopic technique, if you try to cover the spectroscopic technique, whatever you have learned so far, I think most of the techniques you have learned so far, and you know that everything is depending on the source item, and that is the electromagnetic radiation source, right? Now, you will not get one particular instrument which covers all the sources together, because every instrument is directional to understand one particular topic of the molecule, one particular property of the molecule. And as I said, that this is a very intricate aspect. So you cannot learn everything through one instrument about the molecular behavior. So we have, that is how we have segregated it. We means that this has been segregated in a smaller component so that one can go deep inside of that individually. And then when you learn everything, you will have a much better understanding about the molecular behavior. And as you know, that it starts from the higher energy source of gamma, and 2, it can go up to radio frequency region. And based on that, we have different spectroscopic techniques. For example, Mossberg is here. X-ray means X-ray absorption spectroscopy. Then this is the electronic transition domain. We know that visible, UV visible. And then we have in between infrared and visible, there is one more component is there that is called near infrared. And that's very important. Near infrared dyes and all these things, extremely, extremely useful for variety of applications. So one more technique is available, which I have not noted over here. And then, of course, our vibrational spectroscopy, Raman, etc., it belongs to here. And then microwave is a much lower energy component followed by the radio frequency, and the ESR operates under this microwave technique. And already you must be knowing that this our NMR is operating with this radio frequency range, and the radio frequency is a lower energy component compared to the microwave frequency. Okay, so and the if you look at the instrument price, which is not a direct function of the kind of source what you are using, it depends on many factors. For example, the UV visible is the cheapest one. By 10 lakhs, even by 5 lakhs, you can get a good machine. But if you go to the X-ray, it's 3 to 4 crores. Okay, even Mosbar also the similar price range. Now, if you go to near infrared, which is almost threefold, that means 30 lakhs minimum. And then if you come to the EPR or NMR, EPR is a little bit more expensive. For example, the machine what we have in our chemistry department, which is around 4.5 crore machine, it could be up to 300-400 crores also, depending on what what constituents you are planning to buy. It's a very expensive machine, but very informative. And NMR also, it could start from your 2 crore to it can go up to say 20-30 crores even. So we have I think 1, 2, 3, 4 NMR machines in our department. You must have used that machine in different occasions. So the purpose of NMR and purpose of EPR both are diagonally opposite. NMR, you know that primarily it deals with the diamagnetic setup. That means S equal to 0. All the electrons have been paired up, right? But not necessarily that it is applicable for the diamagnetic molecules also. NMR is also equally applicable for paramagnetic molecules. And there we get a lot of informations out of contact sheet interactions. Okay, so NMR having 2 components, one for diamagnetic molecules, which is covering mostly the 90%. Hello. Okay, and also NMR equally applicable for the paramagnetic molecule, but that is rather difficult to understand unless you don't know about the contact sheet effect. Of course, we are not covering NMR over here, but the EPR, remember that is the basic difference. EPR is solely for the paramagnetic molecule. EPR has no role for diamagnetic component of the molecule. At least you need to have 1 unpaired electron in the molecule to study the EPR spectral feature. Okay. Now, that EPR, it can also be defined as electron paramagnetic resonance or electron spin resonance. Some of you define it as EPR. Of course, nothing wrong if you define it as ESR. Okay, both are equally applicable. It's up to the individual, likening, whatever he or she wants to use it. Both are fine. And this EPR would be applicable mostly if you have unpaired electron associated with the organic molecules that we call free radical, either in the free state of the organic molecule or organic molecule as a ligand in the metal complex. Okay, and not necessarily it has to be always 1 unpaired electron. It could be any number of unpaired electrons, odd or even. Now, if it is even, then there is a possibility of spin pairing. So as long as spin is not completely paired under even number of unpaired electrons, that is, I'm saying unpaired electron of even number, some residual spin is there, that molecule would be active for the EPR. irrespective of whatever the number, and any odd number of unpaired electrons, say 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, whatever it is, those would be naturally active for EPR. Now, these unpaired electron in a molecule you can create within the organic molecule. Within the organic molecule present as a ligand in the metal complexes, or you can generate unpaired electrons on the metal ion. That is also possible in the ground state. Or if you can generate unpaired spin in the excited state instead of the ground state. Ground state may be diamagnetic, that means spin paired situation S equal to 0. Now, if you pump the molecule with a suitable radiation, and if it goes to the excited state, either MLCT excited state or some other excited states, and there if you can create some kind of unpaired spin, that molecule could also be equally effective from the EPR point of view. Okay. Now, as I said, that you can generate unpaired electron in your molecule, even if it is not a paramagnetic in the beginning. That means you may start with a, say, metal complex or organic molecule, which is diamagnetic in the beginning or in the initial state. But you can generate unpaired electron. For a metal complex, you can generate at the metal site through redox system. That means if you have a metal complex where metal, all the electrons are paired up, you just allow the metal to oxidize. And in that case, you will have the unpaired spin on the metal. Or if you can reduce it, that means you can generate the cationic metal center or anionic metal center. For example, if you start with one iron compound, say Fe2, whatever the ligand is, and Fe2 in the low spin configuration, then it would be T2G6. So T2G6 means all the electrons are paired up. So S equal to 0. Now you chemically oxidize it or you electrolyze it electrochemically, you get the Fe3+. Now Fe3+, if you get it, there are two options you can think about it. One is your low spin configuration. There you will have T2G5. So 1 unpaired electron. You can also think about high spin configuration. There you will have 5 unpaired electron, right? T2G3, Eg2. 5 unpaired electron. But at the end of the day, you are having unpaired electron on oxidation, right? Similarly, if you reduce iron 2, you will be getting D7 configuration. And you cannot pair up D7, no? So it has to be, high spin configuration or low spin configuration, whatever you consider, you will have one or more unpaired electrons. So that is how you can create it. Similarly, at the organic level, as I said, that ESR is equally applicable for organic and inorganic. Now, at the organic molecule, if you allow the molecule to undergo homolytic cleavage, for example, you can have the radicals. Okay. Now, heterolytic cleavage, if it is taking place, then you will have plus minus. But if you allow the bond to break homolytically, then the two electrons associated with the bond will be distributed among the two components. So each will have one radical. Okay. They may recombine. That's a different story. I'm not talking about that. That means if your EPR technique is quite fast to trap that, that generated radical, you will be getting the resonances immediately. Otherwise, they will again recombine and you will get back your initial state, which is a closed cell system. Okay. And the radical, the problem of the radical, that radical is a short-lived. As I said, that it has a recombination tendency. So it's a short-lived item, but EPR technique is fast enough to trap it. That's why many reactions, organic reactions particularly, when it goes through a particular mechanistic pathway, always the question comes up whether it is following your radical mechanism or nucleophilic mechanism. If it is a radical mechanism, EPR is the technique if you carry out the reaction within the EPR tube. That means the reaction would be following as a function of monitoring the process through the EPR technique. Then if radical is forming, you will be getting one signal or multiple signals in between. So that would corroborate the fact that it is following through the radical mechanism, not through the non-radical pathway. Okay, so and the compulsion is you have to have one unpaired electron at least in the system, and it gives a lot of information. You will see that the later part of the course that it talks about the electronic structure. There is no other technique which could point out well like this about the electronic structure acid. But you have to also remember one point, that a single technique is not enough in today's context to sort out the molecular problem. You need to take the advantage of availability of different techniques, spectroscopic techniques I mean, okay, including structural techniques. Okay, for example, NMR is considered to, at one point of time, NMR was considered to be a kind of Bible, in the sense that it gives us a lot of information about the conformations, geometry and all sort of thing. And even today's context, people prefer to draw the structure of a smaller organic molecule by NMR. But if you have a little bit complicated organic molecule, I'm not talking about metal complex, because complexity enhances drastically, moving from organic molecule to inorganic molecule from spectroscopic point of view. Spectroscopically, inorganic molecules, metal complexes are much more challenging because a lot of complications are there, which you don't see in case of simple organic molecules, because of the fact of the spin orbit interactions, because of the fact of molecular distortions, role of the nuclei of the metal ions, all sort of issues are there. But the thing is that today's context, that NMR is not enough, because many occasions what people have noticed that by NMR, if you try to define the geometry of a molecule, you may be reaching to a correct conclusion, say 95% cases. But 5% cases, the things do not follow properly. And then if you get the crystal structure of those molecules, you will be seeing the way you have interpreted your NMR by following the laid down rules and regulations. Those are not good enough. Okay, so you will be misleading, and then you need to rectify your proposition by looking into the structural aspect, particularly the crystal structure. So that's why in today's context, we try to reassess the process by using different spectroscopic techniques or structural techniques together. So your chances of making mistakes which reduce a lot. Otherwise, 5% I said, 95% cases you would be correct. But 5% is not a small number. When you are dealing with a very important molecule, of course, we don't deal with very important molecules every day. But as and when we deal with the very important molecules like drugs or some catalysts, there we cannot afford to make any mistake. So various techniques are needed, but EPR would be very useful not to directly define your molecular structure, but to define your electronic structure. Okay, so I have noted down certain points that what it can tell us. Okay, the first point is it will tell you that your molecule is a paramagnetic. And remember that EPR is extremely sensitive instrument. Okay, if you have a small amount of paramagnetic impurities in your diamagnetic molecule, the machine will never make any mistake. It will show you the resonance. Okay, but the NMR is not as sensitive as your EPR is concerned. NMR has a lot of advantages, okay, unlike EPR. But EPR, the problem is, it's such a sensitive instrument that you cannot afford to have a, very small paramagnetic impurities in your, diametric sample, and that is how it is good. That if you are dealing with a very interesting molecule from, say, biological sense or some other sense, okay, and that molecule you want to have absolutely diamagnetic scenario, the best way to figure it out, take that compound and check the EPR. If there is no EPR signal, if you get only the baseline signal, that means your compound is perfectly diamagnetic. There is no EPR paramagnetic impurities. So that way it is good. And second, it talks about the symmetry. NMR also talks about a lot of symmetries, etc., etc. EPR also talks about the local symmetry, structural aspects. In that sense, okay, some information you will be getting out of it. Then also it will tell you with EPR is essentially dealing with the excited state properties, not the ground state. Remember that EPR is a much complicated and much lucrative items from physics point of view compared to NMR. NMR mostly deals with the ground state aspect, but EPR you will see the lot of excited state component come, and you will have different wave function based on the fact of whether you are dealing with the doublet scenario or triplet scenario or quartet scenario. So many, depending on the number of unpaired spin, depending on how the unpaired spin in a molecule interacting with each other. It could be non-interacting unpaired spin. That scenario would be different. It could be interacting unpaired spin. It could be partially interacting unpaired spin. So all scenarios are different. And it would be reflected in the profile of the EPR resonances. So you can get a lot of information which you cannot get through any other spectroscopic technique. So that's why it is so indispensable for a chemist who deals with the paramagnetic molecule. And as I said, it's a very, very sensitive, and you don't need very concentrated solution. Unlike NMR, you need a little bit concentrated solution, but you can reduce the concentration depending on the fact of what megahertz machine you are using, right? Now, you can have start with from 200 megahertz is no longer available. The minimum is the 400 megahertz machine. 400, 500, we do have 400, 400, I guess, 500. Then you can have 600, 700. I think, in our institute there is a 700 megahertz machine. So if you're, if you use the higher megahertz machine, then your sensitivity increases and you need to have a smaller concentration of the sample. But in EPR, it's always better to have very, very diluted solution because of the relaxation factor, which is not prominent or so dominating in case of your NMR spectroscopy. As I said, that EPR is an excited state phenomena, so relaxation would become much more important and sensitive. So always it is desirable to use as diluted as possible. Okay, so that's why I said it is also equally sensitive, but only disadvantage in that sense that you need to have unpaired spin, as I said, either integer spin or non-integer spin, and depending on the spectral profile would be varying. We'll discuss all those things later on. And one problem is that your room temperature EPR, unlike NMR, room temperature EPR is not good. You will not get all the desired informations. You will see it later on. So you need to always go for the low temperature. And low means I'm talking about either liquid nitrogen or liquid helium. So in that sense, it is a bit of expensive process to follow. And your resolution also a concern in certain extent. But NMR, you don't have all sort of issues. NMR rather simple compared to EPR. So it's not as general technique as NMR, but it has its own implications. So if you see that molecule which could have the permanent spin, so every day we deal with the paramagnetic molecule. Though from NMR sense, organic people will always say, yeah, most of the molecules are NMR active. That means the whole world is diamagnetic. No, it's not so. Whole world is not diamagnetic. A lot of paramagnetic molecules in our biological system either. And the most important example of paramagnetic molecules, without that our question of our survival is a big question. That is molecular oxygen. Molecular oxygen is not singlet. Singlet oxygen means it will kill us. It's a triplet molecule, right? Okay, and if you see, there is a mistake, this arrow would be upward. And you know the molecular diagram of oxygen, there are 8 electrons, valence electrons I'm talking about, 4 plus 4. And if you draw the MO, very simple MO, then 2 unpaired electrons in the antibonding orbitals, right? And they cannot pair them. Okay, and if it is paired up, then you need to apply the external energy over there, and that's called the singlet oxygen. Singlet oxygen can be generated, but mechanically. Naturally, it is triplet. Similarly, and without oxygen, what could happen to all of us? No need to explain it, right? So it is, that means it is a paramagnetic molecule. Another important molecule, all of you must have heard the name of NO. And NO is such an important molecule. Without that, our existence is equally questionable, because it regulates our what I call it, neurological system. It regulates our blood pressure. If we do have deficiency of NO in our biology, requirement is very less NO. But if you do have the deficiencies, then our blood pressure starts functioning and we may die also. Similarly, if you look at the NO, all our neurological functioning, the way I am looking at to you, or you are looking at others, okay, our limbs movement, body movement, everything is controlled by the neurological setup, right? And there NO is one of the important or the critical components, I should say. And if you look at the NO, this is the only molecule which is the neutral paramagnetic. And if you have an unpaired electron, that means you will get your either anionic radical or cationic radical. But NO is a neutral radical. Why is it neutral radical? Because it's a natural process. And there's one electron could be oxidized, you will be getting nitrosonium ion, that is NO plus. Okay, or it can accept one more electron to give you NO2 minus, right? Otherwise, it is NO dot, that is a neutral radical. I think it's the only radical which is neutral, that is the NO dot. And here you have paramagnetic center. Now, there are many such examples. I thought to give you some, informations as a part of the preamble of this course, where you can have some understanding why EPR is so important. Forget about the potential application or application. Just from the very basic ABCD of chemistry, how come EPR comes into the picture in a serious way, and without that we cannot follow it. One example you can take, say this molecule is a very common organic molecule. It's called 3,6-diamino-1,4-dihydroxybenzene. Okay. Now this molecule, you can see the lot of protons are there. Na? So you add a little bit base over here, say triethylamine base if you use, then 4 of its proton would go off. And then you will have a system that is tetraanionic system. And this is a closed cell system, right? There is no radical over here. And this molecule is very redox active molecule. It is obvious because it's a tetraanionic, very reactive molecule. You can only generate in solution. You cannot expect one 4 minus charge molecule would be stable on your bench top. No, it cannot be. It would try to react by hook and crook. And this molecule, for your information, it is very, very reactive from the redox point of view. So it can undergo 4 electron transfer. Okay, 4 electron transfer it can undergo, and you can see it that first I'm going in this left to right. That means your oxidation process. Okay, of course it would undergo only oxidation because it's a super reduced molecule. It cannot reduce further. So if you oxidized it, then the first question comes, very basic questions. Naturally, that one of the electrons would move out and you will get a radical. Question is, it would be oxygen-centered radical or nitrogen-centered radical. I have shown here the nitrogen-centered radical. The reason is the very basic concept of differential electronegativity between oxygen minus and nitrogen, or oxygen or nitrogen. Okay. So naturally, the electron will not go out of oxygen because more electronegative. So it will go out of nitrogen. So the radical would be formed on nitrogen center, the first one. Now the next question comes. Well, this is a very basic arithmetics of your chemistry, so I can write it, and I'm correct. But what is the experimental evidence in favor of the statements? And science, you know already that no statement is valid till you have your experimental evidence. For example, if you look at all the Nobel Prizes was given in theory, none of them got it till it was being verified by the experimentalist. So theory, once you are doing theory, there are 2 ways to handle it. One through your imagination, the way one writes the poetry. That's a fact of imagination, which is fine. Okay. Which is fine in the form of a poetry to go through, or some write-up to go through. In science also, if somebody tells something good about the fundamental thing in the form of a theory, one would see it very seriously. Yeah, something interesting. But one will not accept it till it gets enough experimental support, right? That boson particle, when it was discovered long back, but the Nobel was given just recently. So here the EPR would come into the picture in a very serious way, because if you have radical on oxygen, your EPR profile and signature would be different if it is on the nitrogen, because of hyperfine interaction, super hyperfine interaction, etc. We'll discuss it later. But what I'm trying to convey to you, that EPR, only the EPR technique, only because you cannot isolate this radical. This is, as I said in the beginning, in the previous slide, that radicals are short-lived. So you cannot isolate it. So it would react immediately. And if it is so, then which technique would help you to understand the radical is here, not here? Mathematically, we can follow it. But experimentally, if I need to give the evidence, then EPR would tell you, no, it is not here, it is here. What one could think from the basic chemistry point of view, that is correct. So similarly, the second electron would give you this structure. This is the way it is written. Now the question is whether the second electron you are getting the 2 radical in a molecule, but it can exist in a resonating form, the way it is being written over here. That's the basic organic chemistry. But whether it is passing through this intermediate or not, how do you establish it? I can write whatever I wish to, I can write. But who cares? Until and unless I give the experimental evidences. So it is a diradical, right? Similarly, if you go to the next step, third electron or fourth electron, again you are getting one diradical setup. You can go through the scheme very carefully, you will see it. Now these 2 diradicals again different, because here your diradical on the nitrogen center, here naturally it is oxygen center, because you have already taken care of the nitrogens. So remaining part is oxygen, there is no option. So electron will go out of oxygen and diradical could be at the carbon side or could be at the oxygen side. So there are 2-3 parallel questions I am putting in front of you. One is among the diradical concept that these diradical should be on the nitrogen side or should be on the oxygen side. Now this diradical, it cannot be on the nitrogen side because this is a double bonded, so it is not possible. So either could be at the oxygen side or could be at the carbon side. EPR would tell you based on the fact of hyperfine and super hyperfine concept. EPR would tell you without any doubt, without any confusion. Okay. Now, if you take another example, the same example what I have already talked about, but the molecule is different. So there are numerous molecules from the organic point of view. They could undergo the redox processes. In the beginning, they remain completely inert. That means inert from the EPR point of view. That means all the electrons are paired up, but you can generate radical or diradical or triradical, whatever it is, through the successive electron transfer processes. Okay. And then you can pass through different intermediates. But remember, all those intermediates are short-lived and they are reactive. And in a true chemical sense, we call it transient intermediate. And the transient intermediate means you have to have a technique, okay, where the lifetime of the technique can take care of the lifetime of that particular radical. For example, EPR is not a very fast technique. It's a 10 to the power minus 8 second, that is its lifetime, okay, time scale. So, and that time scale is good enough to catch hold one radical, okay. So 10 to the minus 8, it's nothing very fast, but not too slow even. Okay, so here also you could see after deprotonation you can get this compound, and then you can follow the this is the oxidation pathway and this is the reduction pathway. And the oxidation pathway, then the same concept that oxygen or nitrogen, where you can expect to have the radical, and you can have a diradical also in between. And reduction also you can have carbon, oxygen, waste radical, and all sort of problems are there. But EPR would tell you that location of the radical, first point, whether it is on nitrogen, whether it is on oxygen or on carbon center, first point. And EPR also would tell you that it is diradical or it's a single radical, because the profile and signature would be completely different. So you can get a lot of information, whatever you want, through the EPR technique. But EPR is the technique which could only pinpoint on that aspect. It will never talk about whether you are dealing with the right compounds or not, because then NMR would come into the picture. That's why I said that in today's context, each technique is complementary to the other. So whenever you want to understand the unpaired electrons, locations, and number of unpaired electrons, etc., you use the EPR. But whenever you want to understand the purity of your compound, okay, whether you are dealing with the right compound or a desired compound, then NMR or crystal structure would come into the picture. So you have to use all in together. Okay. Now, similarly, another point I would like to mention over here, in complementarity, what I told you, that one technique is not enough. One technique would give you enough information to feel whatever it is, right? For example, say if I have fever, what I do, everybody, what do we do? We just measure using the thermometer, that what is the temperature, etc. But that is not enough. We have to understand the reason for that, right? Why this fever has come. Is it due to this problem or that problem or that problem? And accordingly, doctor would prescribe the right medicine. Otherwise, sometimes what happens in the beginning, we take the paracetamol and here and there, And if it is really the common fever, then it will go, otherwise it will not go. Eventually, you have to go to the hospital to diagnose the actual cause of the fever, etc. etc. So that means that you need to go through different experimental procedures to have a better perceptions or understanding of the process. Similarly, over here, you see that that another redox active molecule is the azodie. Any azodie if you take, that you will have the N double bond N bond and some other groups over here. It can go, it can take maximum 2 unpaired electrons, and eventually it will get a deprotonated dihydrozido form via the intermediate radical center, right? Similarly, if you go for the diimine or this structure, either oxygen, sulfur, NR, whatever it is, then from the doubly oxidized state to you can get the doubly reduced state over here. Okay, to electron transfer eventually, like over here, and it passes through the intermediate radical state. Okay. Now this is the through EPR. If you start from here in an EPR tube, you take this compound or this compound, then apply the potential, because each this redox state having its own potential that you can measure it through cyclic voltammetry. So the potential is say x1 and x2. Now if you apply that potential x1, you will be reaching over here, because that potential is not enough to push it up to this level. Then if you apply this potential, then you will be moving from here to here. That means you can control the electron transfer process, 1 electron or 2 electron. If you want to directly get the 2 electron, then you have to apply this much of potential. If you want to stop at the intermediate level, you have to apply this potential, right? Okay. Now, if you carry out that electrolysis within an EPR tube, and if you attach that EPR tube in situ with the EPR machine, then in between you will be getting the resonance for the radical, right? So that will, here also the same thing, that will tell you very clearly, yes, what we have proposed, that from diamagnetic to diamagnetic via the intermediacy of the radical state, the proposal is correct. Okay. Now, today's context, people will not be convinced by that. People will say, you are right. You are right. It is passing through this way. But we want to have more evidence in favor of the statement what you have made. Now, here crystal structure would come into the picture. Because of the fact the redox state of the molecule is a function of its bond parameter. That's called metric parameters. Okay. Function of its bond parameters. Now, if you look at these 3 molecules, you could see the single bond over here, right? And you could see the double bond for the doubly reduced case over here. And you could see somewhere in between, right? Now, this single bond CC distance, whatever it will be, that will be much longer than the double bond distance. So normally, if you take the benzene ring attached to over here, then the distance would be here 1.20 angstrom, here 1.34 plus angstrom, and the intermediate would be 1.30 angstrom, right? Similarly, N double bond N distance is roughly, you can consider 1.25. This is 1.30, and this is your single bond distance is roughly 1.45. Okay. Now, that means the bond distance is diagnostic to its redox state, right? This is the oxidized redox state, this is the doubly reduced redox state, and this is the singly reduced redox state, similarly over here. So, as a function of redox process, the bond distances vary, and you can prove it through the crystal structure. If you are lucky enough to get the crystals in all the 3 states, you can show, yes, what you have observed through EPR, that results are being corroborated through the much more direct evidence of crystal structures. But remember, life is not always so wonderful to all of us. life is much more complicated than what one could anticipate in the beginning. Say diamine case, as I said over here, diamine case, it is very nice, okay, because redox state is a function of the bond parameters. Why it is so? Because if you look at the wave function of the diamine, the nodal planes are along the bond, right? So if we pump in electron or pump out electron from the system, then naturally it will be reflected over here, the bond parameters. On the other hand, the analogous molecule, I'm giving you just one example. That analogous molecule, if you take, say, beta diketiminate, you look at, they're very analogous. And these molecule, and if you look at the wave function, and you will see the nodal planes are on the atom, so that it also passes through the similar redox process. That means anionic, then dianionic, in between the neutral one, radical one. But what will happen? This redox change won't be reflected into the bond parameters change, in the change of bond parameters, because the nodal planes are on the atoms over here. But actually it is passing through the similar case, okay? So to the radical intermediate. So it is not always the case that where bond parameters should take. But if the bond parameters is a function of your redox state, then that would be the easier item to corroborate with the EPR technique. If it is not so, then we call it the hidden non-innocent. Non-innocent. Non-innocent means that molecule, if you look at the organic molecules, 99% molecules, they don't undergo the electron transfer. Only few molecules undergo the electron transfer. We have given some examples. Oxygen, NO, azo function, diamine function, beta diketiminate. There are, say, few organic molecules, they can undergo easy, electron transfer processes. Among those, where your bond parameters varies with the redox state, there you can have the double conformations, okay? But the other case, like beta diketiminate case, there are few such organic molecules are there where it's not a direct function of the redox state, and there your challenge is much bigger to establish the fact that this molecule is participating in the redox processes. Okay. So anyway, so I just thought to give at least one example where things do not follow exactly the way it is expected to follow in majority of the other cases. Okay. So yeah, with this preamble, let us move into the origin of the ESR transitions. Now, in any spectroscopic technique, all of you know, whatever spectroscopy, either it's an electron-based or nuclear-based, whatever you follow it. Now, whichever way you want to follow it, that you have to create a difference in energy between the two states. Okay. Now, if you go on the simple technique, say absorption technique, either this is also an absorption technique, but this is magnetic technique. But non-magnetic absorption techniques like your UV visible spectrum, NIR spectroscopy, or IR spectroscopy, okay, vibrational scale, or even Raman also, there is no magnetic thing. There what happens, by using light, you can develop, you can use the fact of the difference in energy between the ground electronic states, ground level, and the first excited state, second excited state, and so on and so forth. But NMR already you have gone through your organic course. You have seen that it is used the nucleus spin, right? A nucleus spin, it remains plus minus half together, non-degenerate degenerate conditions, and degeneracy is being lifted in the presence of applied magnetic field. Here it is the same thing. So basically you have to create a difference between the ground state energy level and the nearest excited state energy level. And then based on the fact of the difference in energy between the ground and fast, you have to apply that much of energy so that electron can move from the ground state to the upper state, and then absorption wise you will be getting the resonances, etc. And if it is the emission spectroscopy, you will be following the otherwise, that how it is being falling down to the ground state from the excited state. That is the funda of the excited states, emission spectroscopy. But we are not talking about emission spectroscopy. EPR is also an absorption spectroscopy, say moving up. But the problem is that once it moves up, how it behaves, that is very important. How it behaves. That means it can come down very fast, it can come down very slowly, or it can come down in the moderate space. So that dictates you many things as far as the EPR is concerned. I told you already, the EPR is considered to be, from the physics point of view, an excited state phenomenon, because you are pumping the electron to the upper state, magnetic state I'm talking about, and then how it is behaving. So one needs to understand the excited state behavior. Like emission, what we have seen, the triplet emission, singlet emission, all sort of things, that most of the molecules are, it follows the non-radiative pathway, right? That they go into the collision and the excess energy removes in the form of the heat, right? Only few molecules, because of the structural, what I should say, that conjugations and all sort of things, they have a reasonable lifetime and it comes down to the ground level, and then we can catch hold of this excess energy, the radiation at the femto or pico or nano, whatever it is level, right? Now, so you have to first, create that energy difference between the ground and the excited level at the electronic level, and then you have to apply that much of energy. Then the electrons will move from here to there, okay? And then depending on the excited state properties, it may behave in a different way, that you will understand it. But how much energy you need to put, it depends on how much magnetic field you are creating over there. Okay, I'll tell you about that. And that means the two factors you have to consider over here. One is the applied magnetic field quantum, and also it is proportional to the frequency you have to use to allow the electrons to move from ground to the upper state. They are all connected. Now, if you see the ESR instrument, I think these two are similar instrument. This is a real instrument. Okay. You see that our department is having one, SAIF is having one. One time you can go and have a look at. You have the electromagnet over here, which is different from your permanent magnet. You know that. As long as electric field is there, its magnetic property is there. It's a soft metal actually. And as soon as you remove the power, then its magnetic property is gone. Okay. Now here you have to apply certain magnetic field, which we will talk about now. And then the sample, you can see one rod over here through which you have to put the sample inside the magnetic field, right? And then the energy level will be splitted, the ground and excited state, okay? And depending on the quantum of the magnetic field, the gap will be either decreased or increased, okay? So the delta E is a function of the magnetic field what you have applied over here. And accordingly, proportionate amount of energy you need to put through this way so the electron can move on. And that could be passed through the Gauss meter. Your frequency generator is there. Normally, what we use, the 9 gigahertz machine, we use it. 9 gigahertz, that frequency you have to use, and 1 Tesla. 1 Tesla magnetic field, you have to use it. And then your splitting will be there and the absorption will be there, and you will be getting all sort of resonances, etc., etc. So you have basically two components. One component is a strong electromagnet over there, through which delta M is plus minus half in a normal 1 unpaired electron system. That will be splitted, and molecule will take the it will absorb the frequency by using the frequency generator, and it will move up and your detector will detect it. And one more point is there, that the EPR tube what you will be using, that will be actually your quartz made EPR tube. You cannot use the glass made EPR tube. Why you cannot make the glass made EPR tube? The reason is the glass material which absorbs microwave. So you will not know that the resonances what you are getting, that is because of your compound or because of your compound plus your that glass tube what you have used. So so one should use the quartz tube. Quartz will not absorb the microwave, so it is fine. Okay. Now it's a very basic thing you must be knowing about it, that how the splitting takes place. So it says that energy of an electron in a magnetic field, which could be defined as E equal to minus mu bar H, and mu bar is the projection of magnetic moment in the direction of magnetic field. Okay, we know that. And mu bar equal to G beta ms. Now G beta is a constant over here, and beta, if you see, Eh by 4 pi mc, already we know it. This is the Planck constant, charge of the electron, mass, velocity, constant, etc., etc. Now, if you consider the electron, then E is negative. That means your beta is negative. If beta is negative, that means E equal to essentially the negative, negative, positive. So essentially, we are dealing with G beta MSH, right? So that means the minus half would be the lower state, and plus half would be the higher state. So we can put it this way, that plus minus half in the absence of magnetic field. As soon as we apply the magnetic field, then minus half would be the ground state and plus half would be the excited state, because of your the same equation, E is the minus. So minus minus plus. And then your energy would be G beta MSH. That means G beta H MS equal to minus half, and this will be plus half G beta H. So what is the difference? Difference is G beta H. So that means you could see the H is directly proportional to H. As I told you just now, that how much energy you need to pump into the system to allow the electron to move from this state to that state, that depends on what H you are using. These are all constant, no? What H you are using. So that is how you can have different instruments available. I'm giving you just one example just to set. Yeah, let's go to this slide. Yes. Now, EPR wise, if you look at the NMR, we call it 300 megahertz, 400 megahertz, 500 megahertz, 6, 7, 1000, even 1000 is available now for protein molecules. To understand all the minute informations, you get it. EPR also the same thing, that you can use different instruments, X band, K band, Q band, W band. Now I stopped over here, but the W band can go up to much higher field. I'll tell you now. Normally the machine what we use, I think 90% cases or 95% cases, we use the X band machine. Why do we use this X band machine? Because it is much cheaper. Much cheaper means 4 crore only, right? Okay. So 4 to 5 crores. That is the X band machine. What we have also here. Now X band machine, what is the problem with the X band machine? X band machine, you could see that your magnetic field, what you use the maximum 10,000 Gauss. That means 1 Tesla, maximum. You cannot stretch it further. And the frequency what you use for 10,000, the gap what you will be getting for that 9 gigahertz is fine to pump electron from the ground state to the upper state. Right? That is called 9 gigahertz. H is the 9 gigahertz. Don't forget it. Now, if you go for higher, and I have written here, the starting is 9,000. you can move, that means you can move further. So up to 12,000 you can go, and there you can have, say, the two different frequency you require. One is 24, one is 30. Because what is happening, if you use the more frequency, H and H nu, capital H and H nu proportional, na? So if you use the more magnetic field, then gap would be increased, na? So gap would be increased means you need to provide more amount of energy to pump the electron from ground to excited state. So here your frequency will be 24, here your frequency will be 35, right? Now moving from 9 gigahertz machine to 35 gigahertz machine, your price will be almost double to triple. Okay, so 4 crore to become 10 crores roughly. If you go to 35 frequency, it will be 35, 10 crores machine. Now one can move up to 90 gigahertz machine. 90 gigahertz machine means your field is starting at the 35,000 Gauss. That means almost 35 Tesla. You can move up to this, and there you can see, and your price would be roughly 200 crores. And then you can go up to 200 gigahertz machine to 300 gigahertz machine. I think it's $1 billion. Huh? Okay, there are few machines, not in India, few machines in across the globe. Is there only few machines are there. Now you could argue, well, is it a fancy toy that you pay more, and is it just a, sometimes what you call a mobile you can buy by 10,000, 5,000, or you can also spend Apple for 1.5 to another 2 crore to 2 lakhs also. Now for a common people like me or some other people, there is a fancy toy. Let the young guys to enjoy their Apple of 2 lakhs and to show, I have this Apple 2 lakhs. But it's not so. The reason is it depends on your requirement. Okay, if you do a lot of work and with this particular mobile, then you need expensive mobile, right? And but some of we use the expensive mobile to have our enjoyment, pleasure, or nothing wrong in it. Who can afford, why not? But many people, they use expensive mobile because of the following fact, that their requirement is different, which cannot be managed through the cheaper mobile. Similarly, over here, you need to go for the expensive machine. And expensive means I'm talking about $1 billion machine. $1 billion, na 7,000 crore. Okay, so why people go for that expensive machine when they require that sort of information which you cannot afford to get by using the common machine? What I am talking about, I am talking about the minor, intricate informations about the electronic structure. I will give you the examples later on, that how the super hyperfine interaction takes place, how the your molecular distortion being reflected, symmetry being reflected in the EPR profile, all sort of details. If you want to know from the fundamental point of view, then you need to have minor details, and for that, if you increase the gap, naturally you will have better perceptions. Now, once your gap is smaller, you will be getting informations which are not complete. But if you increase the gap, that means, for example, I am giving another example. So one spectrum you draw with a very small bandwidth, and if we expand that spectrum, same spectrum, if we expand it, then you will be getting all the minor details. That means shoulders, where the shoulders are there, where the band is slightly splitted, all information you will be getting. And here you are essentially expanding the band of that thing. That means you require a lot of extra energy to pump the electron to the upper to the excited state, and but you will be getting a lot of information which you won't be getting out of this region. So that's why it's very important. So that is the thing I was trying to convey, that h nu is a function of direct function of h. And then one more point comes out, that you see that this is very important, that once you go for NMR, you check the change in chemical shape, na? Okay. Once you check it chemical shape, it gives you a lot of information about the structural aspects, including your conformation, conformal, all sort of things, etc. But NMR won't give you much information unless you go for contact sheaf effect, the electronic structural aspects. But EPR is one of the techniques by which you will be getting a lot of information about the NMR aspect, because nuclear spin interacts. Now, why nuclear spin interacts in the EPR spectrum? Because in EPR you are using higher energy source. Am I right? Because when you record the absorption spectrum, for example, electronic spectrums, okay, it is different from atomic spectrum. Atomic spectrum, you must have noticed that you get the lines, right? But in the electronic spectrum of the molecule, you get the one envelope, right? Okay, why did you get an envelope? Because of the involvement of the vibrational modes over there, because of the involvement of the rotational modes over there. Why you get all these modes within the electronic spectral domain? Because that energy is much higher than the infrared energy. That energy is much higher than the rotational energy. So all come together, right? So each electronic level having vibrational level and rotational levels. So all come together, right? So similarly, microwave is the EPR region and radio frequency is the NMR region. So you are using higher energy source for the EPR. So naturally, what will happen? Your nuclear spin impact will be there, right? And that is the reason behind your hyperfine splitting, okay, and super hyperfine splitting in due course of time. So NMR case, we have to understand now from that point of view, the NMR splitting pattern is diagonally opposite to the EPR splitting pattern. Because EPR you are dealing with the electron spin, and NMR you are dealing with the nuclear spin. So the beta, that EH by 4 pi MC, the E would be positive here. So naturally E equal to mu bar H, that minus would remain. Am I right? Okay. Minus mu bar H. Okay. So your plus half would be the ground state now, and minus half would be the upper state now. In case of NMR. Why I am telling this thing? Because you have to use the Mi and Me. Okay, nuclear spin and electron spin interaction, every time you have to use in your EPR understanding. So how do you split it? That is very important. No? So that's why you need to know that how the nuclear spin would come into the picture, and there your energy profile would be diagonally opposite, but the quantum is same. Instead of G beta EH, it will be G beta P. P means proton H. Okay. And then the next question comes that why NMR takes place at the radio frequency region, lower energy region. And answer is over here. If you this is NMR and EPR, if you consider it, then delta E requirement for electron and delta E requirement for proton resonance, then G beta EH by G beta PH, right? Only difference would be here. If you fix the magnetic field same for both the cases, and beta for electron is your G for electron is 2 and G for proton is 5. Rest are, you can back calculate it, okay? And you will be seeing that under a particular age, the resonance frequency for electron requirement is 657 times higher than that of the proton. So electron resonance takes 657 times higher than the required proton resonance energy, because of the fact of the difference in G of electron and G of proton. Of course, the beta proton, beta, it all would come into the pictures, right? So that's why it takes place in the radio frequency region, and it takes place in the microwave region. And because of that electron spin can react to the nuclear spin in the EPR, but the reverse is not true. Okay. Now, how the electronic EPR spectrum would look like? There are two different ways one could plot it. In NMR, we plot it through this absorption mode. You must have noticed, NMR all absorption mode. EPR also we can do the same way, like this, from here to here the transition, and we can get one absorption spectral profile like this. Okay, just a second. Let me take the pointer. What is the pointer? Okay, next day I'll take the pointer. So you will have then absorption mode. Okay, but the unlike your NMR, here we get lot of hyperfine, super hyperfine splitting. NMR we get the chemical shift. Okay, so one peak does not split further, but it splits to the chemical shift, and the gap is slightly broader than the EPR splitting pattern. As a result, what happened? NMR splitting pattern you can see it, but EPR splitting pattern in the absorption mode would not be very easy to follow it, and therefore we can use the derivative mode. You can see the derivative mode over here. Now, derivative mode, what we do it, we use it, the dA by dH. dA means absorption as a function of your magnetic field. Okay. Now, there are two ways to plot the EPR. One way, you can fix the frequency and you can vary the magnetic field. So, at a particular magnetic field, at a particular frequency and magnetic field, what will happen? The resonance will develop. Or you can do alternatively, you can use the particular frequency and vary the magnetic field. And where the resonance would take place, you will see the spectrum. But the conventional practice is the vary the magnetic field. But frequency variation technically is not so simple. So we don't vary the frequency. We use the 9 GHz machine or 20 GHz machine or 35 GHz machine or 90 GHz machine, but only we vary the magnetic field. So within that magnetic field frequency range, where the magnetic field coming or synchronizes, you will get the resonance, right? So we can do it in the absorption mode, or you can do it in a derivative mode. But derivative mode advantage is that all the hyperfine and super hyperfine small line, which would be nicely splitted in the derivative mode, first derivative mode. That means your signal to noise ratio would be much better over here. So if you have the small multiple, your hyperfine or super hyperfine interaction in the EPR tube, in the EPR spectrum, in the absorption mode, most likely you'll be missing it. But if you go for the derivative mode, very unlikely that you will be missing each and every hyperfine or super hyperfine splitting. So the conventional practices are: number one, keeping the frequency fixed, vary the applied magnetic field, not the reverse. And second conventional practice is, in EPR, you need to monitor the first derivative, not the absorption. In the machine, that's why it is being, as a default, it comes like that. But if you wish for any specific reason, you can also switch it to the absorption mode. That is nothing difficult. But for you may get one spectrum with the 100 lines, and absorption mode would look like awful. Okay, you cannot get any information out of that. But if you have the derivative curve, the way it is being shown at the right hand side, the red colored, that would be fantastic. And you can count the number of the peaks, you can get the bandwidth, you can get the difference in between the two peaks in terms of the magnetic field, either Gauss or Tesla or mini Tesla, whatever it is. So that will tell you a lot of additional informations. Okay. Now the last one for today's context, I think this is one of the unique items what you do see all the times in the APR spectroscopy, which you do not see in many spectroscopic technique or most of the spectroscopic techniques. That is the relaxation process. Relaxation is a common terminology in spectroscopy. That is true. You must have heard these things, right? But in EPR, it is, I should say, rather very serious. Why I am saying rather very serious? Because of the following reason. One is the relaxation in a very simple way one could understand it. That means when you are exciting the molecule from its stable ground state to the excited state, the molecule don't enjoy that excited state. Let me put it that way. For example, under normal circumstances, all of we, at the human level, all of we remain in the ground state, right? And that is our stable condition. We can live it throughout our life, 100 years, 80 years, 70 years, 60 years, whatever it is, in the ground state. But, sometimes we get annoyed, nah? Or sometimes we get, excited. If you feel very happy because of whatever the reasons, we are getting excited. And you must have noticed that we cannot remain for a longer period of time through our excitement, right? Either through anger or through enjoyment. Yeah? We cannot remain. That is a temporary phase for everybody, And if we remain in our excited conditions for a longer period of time, then it's a danger for our life. We may have blood pressure, we may have sugar, we may have this, we may have that, and at the end, we will be leaving the world without intimating anybody even. So excited state is not the regular state on which people can depend on. The normal state is the ground state. So once you are excited, the molecule also behaves in the same way. Okay, once you are exciting the molecule, it will try to release that excess energy and to come down to the normal state. That is the simple way if you try to understand. Now the question is how it would release the energy. If it releases the energy at a very fast way, then what will happen in terms of spectroscopic terminology, your line width would be broad enough. And a spectral line width I'm talking about would be broad enough. Now, if the spectral line width is the broad enough, then what is the problem? As far as the EPR is concerned, because EPR, you must have noticed in the last few slides I have shown it, that you get a lot of hyperfine lines, right? That means one line is being divided into say 10 lines or 5 lines. Now, if the spectrum itself in the beginning is very broad, that means all the splitted lines would be buried inside that envelope, right? So it would appear to you a single line, but actually it is not single. There are many lines are being buried inside that. So what is the implications of that? Implication says that you are missing very vital information about the electronic structural aspects of the molecule. Very, very vital information you will be missing. So it is our task to make the spectrum or the resonance or the signal as sharp as possible so that we don't miss the vital points, right? Okay, so in order to understand, for example, I'm giving you another practical example. You would probably agree with me. Earlier days, you must not have seen that particular days. That is, we had only the black and white photographs. Nah? Now, nobody can imagine the black and white photographs. And in those days, black and white photograph was well accepted, even for the visa purposes and everything. Everywhere, it was well accepted. When there was no option. But nowadays, it is not acceptable. Because what the minor details of somebody's face or something, which are not accessible by the black and white picture. If you have the colored picture, then most of the items would be accessible or visible. This is one way to follow it. Similarly, over here, if your line is broad enough, many informations would be missing. But if you have a sharp line, then all the informations would be exposed, right? So task is to do, and then you can see the equation. It is written, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You know that the line width, if you consider the delta nu and the relaxation time is delta t, is inversely proportional. Inversely proportional means if it is very fast, that will be broad. If it will be not so fast, it will be sharp. So our duty, technologically, our responsibility to make it sharper. And how to make it sharper? There are two ways. How it can dissipate excess energy. One is that it relaxes the energy, excess energy, to the lattice vibrational mode, right? Now, lattice vibrational mode means, that means you have to reduce the vibrational components of the molecules. And as you know, that molecule vibrational component can be reduced by converting from gaseous to liquid to the solid. So you can take it to the solid level. Okay. And also, other way you can do it to cooling down the system. So the one option to take care of this problem of spin lattice relaxation, that you have to perform the experiment at low temperature and preferably at the solid state level. But there are difficulties. The solid state level, what will happen, which is good for organic molecule, but the difficulty of the solid state level is that that resolution won't be that good. So if you want to have a good resolution, then you have to have both the things together. One is the low temperature, where you can restrict the Brownian motion, vibrational motion, all sort of things you can control it. And also you can control the resolution problem. Okay, remember this thing. Ideally, solid state would be better from the vibrational motion restriction point of view, and low temperature. And low temperature means I am not talking about that zero temperature, -10, -20. That doesn't work. So you have to go down to minus 77 K, that means liquid nitrogen temperature. And many molecules in EPR, you will be saying the relaxation process is so prominent, so dangerous, that even 77 K is not good enough to get any signal. You have to go to the expensive liquid helium facility, that means at 4K. Then only you can get it. So you have to chill down like anything. And the second factor is spin-spin relaxation. Spin-spin relaxation means what happened, that any paramagnetic molecule, it induces the paramagnetism at the nearby center. The nearby center, if it is so, then that is a function of the distance, because the induced magnetic field, what it creates at the neighboring center, that is inversely proportional to the third part of the distance of the neighboring atoms, molecules, whatever you consider. So that means if you increase the distance between the two paramagnetic center to some extent or little extent, then you will have a lesser magnetic polarization, right? So how do you increase that? One is the dilution effect. This is a homeopathic technique, okay, that you dilute it. So that I told you in the beginning that in EPR your requirement solution should be very, very diluted, unlike NMR. Dilute solution is necessary also from the point of view of elimination of spin-spin relaxation process. This is one thing in solution. So the solid state resolution problem could be avoided by using the very dilute solution, and of course low temperature. That is mandatory. Or if you want to use the solid state compounds, some compounds are not soluble. Some materials are not soluble. What to do? But paramagnetic centers are there. you have to record the magnetic EPS spectrum. Then you can go for the solid solution. Solid solution means host case technique. Host case techniques mean, say this is one compound, that iridium 4 Cl6, and that is your D5. Iridium 4 means D5, S equal to half, and you make a host of platinum 4 Cl6. The platinum 4 means again D6, and iridium platinum, you can understand now. And then this is the diamagnetic setup. Now here, that solid solution, you know the general rule that two solids can be a good solution if they have the same geometry. Here you look at the geometry is the octahedral. If you look at the charge is the same, platinum 4, iridium 4. And if you look at your counter anion, that is also fixed. Okay, and the ligands are same. Everything is same. Only difference is that in case of iridium, it is your D5, and platinum it is D6. So one is the diamagnetic host, and you add little bit of paramagnetic molecule or your desired molecule into that, and that ratio has to be at least 1:200. Otherwise, there won't be any dilute solution in the solid state. And if you record it, then you can avoid considering that spin-spin relaxation process. But the problem of this technique is that you need to find out the suitable host. Sometimes suitable host is not easy to obtain. In this case, we could manage to get it. For example, another host is I can think about that. They say ruthenium 3 and your cobalt 3. Cobalt 3 is your D6 system. Ruthenium 3 is a D5 system, and you can have the same geometry, same ligand. Then cobalt 3 octahedral compound can function as a diamagnetic host, and ruthenium 3 always low spin. It can function as your cobalt 3 always low spin octahedral. It can function as a paramagnetic molecule, and you will get beautiful spectrum. So this is how one could handle the probable problems arise due to the relaxation problem. Major thing is you have to cool down it. If you have to use the solid, wherever solid does not give you better resolution, you can use the solution, but you have to use a very dilute solution, which is good from other point of view, that you don't need much amount of compound to get the ESR of your molecule. I think I should finish it over here today. Thank you very much. You will be receiving your PPT and video. So far we have covered by evening. Thank you so much. Any questions, anything? Hello? Hello? Anything you want to share? Could you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm finishing it today over here. So we will be again meeting on Thursday, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So another thing.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Sir, where will you upload the videos?
I think it will reach to you. Our students will take care. They will send the videos to all of you.
Okay, sir.
Or if you hold on for a second, let me find out from the student. So they will send you both the video and the this thing. Don't worry, students are not around by, you will be receiving it by evening. Okay. And if you have any difficulties in going through the videos or receiving the videos, please drop a line to me. I will fix it. So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank
Sir,
you, sir.
so something about not the class about the NSEM actually. I also talked with Murugavel sir last class about this. Actually, we are having like two papers on the same day on like 15. So like if possible, we were thinking if we could like postpone it to like another date within the NSEM week only.
Well, exam date is not in our hand. I would suggest you to talk to the,
Rajesh sir.
the timetable coordinator.
Okay, sir.
So one option is talk to the timetable coordinator and you see what he responds you back. And then if you wish to have further discussion, talk to HOD. Yeah? So
Okay.
they are the right people to deal with the exam dates and etc. We are free to do anything, whatever you want, if it is permitted by the department.
Okay, sir.
So we cannot alter anything. And as you know, this is a big class, na? So it's very difficult to alter the scenario. So have you word
Yeah,
with the
so Murugavel sir also said that. So I kind of floated a form within students in the group. So like among them, like this was
I'm telling you, you just do one thing among yourself, you generate a consensus. Okay,
okay, sure, sir.
whatever you feel better for you,
Hmm.
and you cannot come without any explanation. Then you meet with the that I think Rajesh in our department who is coordinating this thing.
Yes,
So
sir, Rajesh sir, that I'm trying to.
talk to Rajesh that this is the situation and the general feeling of the student is like this. So can it be handled appropriately? If he
Sure,
says yes,
sure.
it's fine, no problem. If he says no, I cannot handle at my own level, then the last resort is to approach to HOD. Now,
Okay,
if
sir.
HOD says no, means the matter is closed. If HOC says that yes, matter is open and it will follow. And we will be only following the instructions what HOD is or the department is allowing us to do so. We cannot
Sure, sir.
implement
Sure.
anything in this regard. Okay. And just develop consensus and feel free to talk to everybody because we are here for you only. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.